Again, it's a pleasure to be here. I do see some names, faces that I recognize, and I also want to point out we have a gentleman right here, Dale Brown, and his wife Tina. I'm going to talk about Nathaniel Hopkins here later on, and Dale is a direct descendant of Nathaniel Hopkins, and we'll be celebrating NACE's Day on track in November 1st. It's a celebration of the emancipation of enslaved persons here in Talbot County. And then, Dale, you're also a principal of a school in Dent, is that correct?
No longer.
No longer, but I heard you were
43 years and then 5 years of consultant work. So I'm a little done.
I'm Trina Helmer. Dale was principal when my kids went through middle school. And
She's still up now. See? Well, thank you. I did well.
they both are contributing members of society, so we're good.
Thank you so much.
So at the end, then we'll have some good discussion. Maybe Dale will chip in. But Dale and I have something else in common. Both born and raised in Oxford.
Sure.
Western County is a few years ahead of me. Doesn't look like it, but he was a few years ahead of I am. So here we are for my lecture, and I do enjoy this. And of course, I'd like to start a little bit about me and what I did. So next slide, please. And as I said, I'm from Talbot County, Maryland. I did publish a book. I did research. I was laid up for a couple of years, so I kind of dedicated to research. And it's titled "When Democracy Fell: The Subjugation of Maryland During the Civil War." And some of you may have had my lecture here or not, but I say this book is about the constitutional crisis experienced in Maryland. It's not about the battles or anything like that. And what does that mean? Well, the military occupation in Maryland cities. Fake news and disinformation to manipulate the people, imprisonment of political opponents and dissenters. We had 54 members of our legislature in prison, Baltimore mayors in prison, the police commissioners of Baltimore were in prison. They take over the Baltimore police by the federal government. Our U.S. congressman was in prison. Newspaper editors were in prison. One was Frank Key Howard, the grandson of Francis Scott Key. And we had suppression of the judiciary branch. And here, the cover of my book is the Talbot County Courthouse, where the federal provost marshals went in and beat the judge and drug him from the courthouse because he was trying to give constitutional protections. And then I uncovered election frauds and manipulations to ensure elections outcome. And election frauds. No book has been written on the subject, the first one. So my readers tell me this is a history for today. And what's really cool is, and friends that I know, and some are far left and some are far right, they all say the same thing. So I guess it's good history that we can learn from. And I just a little bit myself and then push my book. Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And there's some amazing similarities to what happened. And whether you agree with what happened or not, it was still really pushing our Constitution and something we should think about when power wants to take certain liberties away from all of us, because eventually it does affect all of us. So enough about that book. I did serve as a Marine Corps officer as a young man. And between flying tours, I worked arms control treaties, and I spent a lot of time in the former Soviet Union. And I actually spent the summer of 1992 coordinating humanitarian relief, and that really changed me on my views. And I do respect the Constitution, the freedoms and liberties we have here so much more, because I saw what authoritative rule does to other people. I'm a board member. I'm on the board of directors of Talbot Historical Society, and I'm very active in over local VFW American Legion. My forte is military history, and I'm active researching and promoting that history of the Historical Society. So our current exhibit is on what you're going to see here at the Historical Society, and I'll show you some slides in a bit. And next year's exhibit, I talked them into doing about our Revolutionary War, Talbot County's role in that. So that's really cool. Now this slide here is a little bit misleading. This is me flying, but that's not me. I'm right here in left echelon. That actually is our executive officer of my squadron, PMA 312. And he is a little famous because he was in the movie Top Gun. He was a big papa movie Top Gun, named Lynn Settinger, call sign 6. So next slide, back to the subject at hand. At the beginning of the U.S. Civil War, Maryland was distinctly different than all the other states in the Union. Maryland was a slave state, but it was in transition, where the barbaric practice was diminishing. Maryland was not a cotton state, nor did it have access to new lands to the west. As our soil played out, our agricultural practices were dramatically changing. from year-round labor-intensive tobacco production to the growing of grains and cereals that required seasonal spikes in labor. Many farms are broken down to much smaller operations where the white owners often work side by side with the free and enslaved laborers. Who's calling? Why is my phone? Excuse me. Okay. Thought I put it on silent.
Please silence your phone, not to interrupt the presentation.
That's on silent. Okay. Where was I? Okay, so landowners were working side by side with their free and enslaved laborers, and it was leading what I term and awakened by many, humanity of their laborers. At the start of the Civil War, half the blacks in Maryland were already freedmen, and Baltimore City hosted a free black population of over 20,000 strong. In 1860, there was 83,942 free blacks in Maryland, the most of any state in the nation. In 1860, Maryland held 87,189 enslaved persons, and there were 13,783 slave owners, which is slightly less than 3% of the free population. Manumissions of enslaved persons in their mid-30s was becoming quite increasingly common, which added to the free black population. And once a person was freed, then his descendants will also be born freemen, added to the population. However, manumitting enslaved persons in the mid-30s wasn't necessarily an altruistic measure, because Maryland had certain slave laws that said once an enslaved person turns age 45, you're not allowed to free them. And the rationale was they were too old to care for themselves. And part of the manumission is that they had to sign a document. They can care for themselves. They can provide themselves their own living. Likewise, if a person became disabled or infirm, mentally and physically, you weren't allowed to free them either. So a lot of times people would just free them by the mid-30s so they can avoid having to care for them for the rest of their lives. So I put this in there because I don't want it to sound like it was all an altruistic measure for your case. A lot of times it was, and sometimes it wasn't. Slavery, however, was not the origin of the free black population in our state, in our county. So next slide. So the question is, how and why did the free black population come about in Maryland? How do we have so many free blacks? And the answer is that free blacks have been part of Maryland and Talbot County's history since the colonial period. And this year, arriving as indentured servants. Just like my ancestors, Darby County came into Kent Island in 1680. After fulfilling their contracts, many became freemen and many owned land, and their descendants were born freemen. Black indentured servants were some of the very first to arrive in Maryland with the Jesuit missionaries in 1634. And one of these first indentured servants was a man named Matthias de Sosa. After his contract of service, Matthias de Sosa became a free man who owned property, commanded a ship, led a fur trading expedition up the Susquehanna River, and served in the 1641 Legislative Assembly of Freemen. Matthias de Sosa was the first black to have voted in the American legislature. And no record remains of Sosa activities after 1652, but his legacy of courage and success is regarded with great pride and awe by the citizens of St. Mary's County and the city. And the image we have here is a plaque for Matthias de Sosa in St. Mary's County. Next slide, please. In colonial Maryland, as tobacco cultivation expanded in the late 17th century, so did the need for labor. Economic conditions had improved in Europe, however, and decreasing the number of Europeans willing to become indentured servants. Indentured servitude could not meet the labor demands, so slavery increased rapidly, reaching over 40,000 enslaved persons in Maryland by 1750. But our free black population remained and increased. With the Declaration of Independence that declared all men are created equal, it had a profound impact upon the new nation. In fact, Thomas Jefferson wanted to abolish slavery in the original draft of that document, but slavery was entrenched and had plagued humankind since early civilization, and that provision was removed. With the creation of the U.S. Constitution in 1787, a few years after the Declaration of Independence, that created our Union of States, again, abolition was debated, but a compromise had been made, and slavery was honored in our Constitution but not mentioned by its name. But changes began to happen. It was a process, and slowly abolition began in the northern states, but it always followed a distinct pattern. First, the economics of the barbaric practice would diminish, and then the moral arguments would gain ground. It always happened in that order. By the 19th century, slavery was actually declining in Maryland due to change in agricultural practices we previously stated, but along with religious opposition, particularly the Quakers and Methodists, and with the decreased need for year-round labor that was required for tobacco production, and mainly needing seasonal labor for planting and harvesting grain, slavery was becoming less economical, and it was more profitable to hire labor as needed. There was also a rise in mechanization, such as the Hussey reaping machine, promoted right here in Talbot County, that greatly minimized the amount of labor required to harvest wheat. As slavery declined, the free black population expanded. Yes, Maryland was following the path of the United States, where abolition followed a pattern, where the economics of the barbaric practice diminished first, and then allowing the moral arguments to gain traction. Next slide. Okay. Hold up here. By 1790, Talbot County had over 1,000 free blacks. In the heart of Easton, the Hill community stands as a testament to resilience. One of our nation's oldest, if not the oldest, free black American communities, continuously inhabited since the 1780s. The 1790 census record shows that 410 free black residents called the Hill home. Many owning property, and which is a remarkable feat, at a time when slavery still gripped much of our nation and our state. Generations of families, some tracing 16 generations, built lives there, working as merchants, sailors, midwives, carpenters. They fought for freedom, not just for themselves, but for their kin. Because by their work and earning money, they would buy the relatives' freedoms who were still in bondage. Their contributions shaped Easton's history. They created churches, businesses, and civic organizations that still stand to this day. The Hill is more than a neighborhood. It is a living legacy of strength and perseverance. Its history is a cornerstone of American freedom. And of course, we have to talk about the John Wesley Church. Founded in 1838 on land deeded by plantation owner Ann O'Earl, John Wesley Methodist Church, Episcopal Church, outside of Oxford, became a cornerstone of faith and resilience. Despite the deep racial divides, vision of the time, it stood as a sanctuary where free and enslaved African Americans walked miles to worship, sing, and learn together. By 1851, the church played a radical role in the fight for equality, becoming an abolitionist and it had an integrated congregation. It united 31 white and 26 black members, an extraordinary occurrence in a community still half enslaved. And that came from the records we saw from John Wesley Church. So now, by the eve of the Civil War in Talbot County, there was 2,964 free blacks and 3,725 slaves, along with 81,106 whites. And of this, there was 506 were slave owners. So the black population is about 45%. Which gives statistical information. Hold up. Next slide, please. You're already on it. Thank you. Okay, so when the Civil War broke out, blacks were not allowed to serve in the Union Army in any capacity. A few early Union generals actually established black units as they made inroads into Southern territory, but these generals were rebuked by their superiors and President Lincoln, and these early units were disbanded. There was a 1792 federal law that barred blacks from bearing arms in the U.S. Army. Additionally, during the early years of conflict, Mr. Lincoln's official position was that the war was about reunification only of the Southern states, and not about abolition. Mr. Lincoln did not want to further inflame the Southern states by the recruitment of enslaved persons or using blacks from the North to fight against them. The administration also believed that using blacks to fight would not just inflame the Southern states that had seceded, but it would also inflame and annihilate the 4 border slave states that remained in the Union. The only point here is that there was 4 slave states. Maryland, for one, that fought for But in August 1861, Congress passed the Confiscation Act, allowing Union forces to seize enslaved persons in Confederate territory, but it did not permit them to work or fight for the Union Army. These seized slaves were referred to as contraband. By mid-1862, though, the government was pushed into reconsidering this policy because of the escalated number of formerly enslaved people coming over the Union lines and the declining number of white volunteers to fight, and the pressing personal needs of the Union Army, Union men. On July 17, 1862, the Militia Act was passed by Congress, which allowed blacks to serve in the Union Army as laborers only and detailed their pay at $10 a month. Still not allowed to fight. But at least they're now being brought in to help in a certain capacity. And in walks another Talbot County and Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, born a slave here in Talbot County in 1818. In 1838, with the help of his future wife, Anna Murray, a free black woman, he escaped to the north, disguised as a sailor. Douglass became, as we all know, a leading abolitionist, using his powerful speeches and writings to expose slavery's brutality. During the Civil War, he advocated for black enlistments in the Union Army, believing it would prove their equality and their right to U.S. citizenship. Because at the time, blacks were not U.S. citizens. And Douglass stated, once let the black man get upon his person the brass letter, U.S., let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket, and there is no power on earth that can deny that he's earned the right to citizenship. Next slide, please. Douglas's efforts helped persuade President Lincoln to authorize blacks to both serve and to fight for the Union cause. Douglass met with Lincoln several times, urging him to make emancipation a central war goal. And this obviously led to the Emancipation Proclamation. And interestingly, it was in the Emancipation Proclamation that authorized our blacks to fight. There's a little section at the very bottom that authorizes this. Very, very interesting. And the Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863. So into the beginning of the third year of the war. Okay. After the Emancipation Proclamation, which allowed blacks to serve in the Union Army, General Order Number 143 was issued in May 1863, which officially established the United States Colored Troops, which I'll refer from now on as probably USCT. Initially, pay discrepancies existed, with the black soldiers' pay is limited to the laborers' pay rates prescribed by the Militia Act. And this caused a pay discrepancy of nearly 40% less than the white soldiers' pay until mid-1864, when Congress raised pay for black freemen only, black men who were free to join, not enslaved persons. Finally, full equal pay for all black soldiers was approved in 1865, retroactive January 1st, 1864. I think some of the rationale that the enslaved persons' pay was not increased is that their owners were compensated $300 for their service. And to pay a soldier back then was $14 a month. So I think that was a rationale. Some people kind of look at this as a sign of discrimination. My research has showed that President Lincoln looked into this immediately. He got his attorney general into it and says it's prescribed by law. Congress hasn't changed pay rates. Congress prescribed that there only be $10 a month versus $14 a month, and Congress hasn't changed it. And when you look into Congress, they were slow to act. Within Congress, there still had a group of Democrats, titled Copperheads, and the Democrats were fighting anything against the war, and they slowed this up immensely. So we can look at that, but it did cause problems. Because soldiers who were fighting didn't care about the products. They just knew we're getting paid 40% less. And guess what? They didn't complain. One or two. Very, 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 very few. No complaints. Next slide, please. With the passing of General Order Number 143, recruitment into USCT began in earnest. Colonel William Burney was appointed by the War Department to oversee the recruitment of United States colored troops in Maryland. Bernie was the son of a prominent abolitionist and was an ardent advocate for the enlistment of black soldiers and personally led efforts to raise 7 USCT regiments in Maryland. To attract volunteers, Bernie's recruiters used steamboats on the Eastern Shore, which sometimes featured a black marching band that went through the towns. And this tactic encouraged hundreds of enslaved men to leave plantations and enlist. It was also known to liberate enslaved persons who were imprisoned in Baltimore if they would enlist. Colonel Bernie established training camps at Camp Bernie in Baltimore, with a large camp established later at Benedict, Maryland, which is referred to as Camp Stanton. The image here is a recruitment poster. It's actually in Pennsylvania. They talk about Camp William Penn, but it's a very famous recruitment poster that was produced in the papers. Of course, it's the colors. They added color to it for recruiting USCT. And of course, Frederick Douglass promoted recruitment of the USCT and sponsored this particular recruitment poster you have right here. And Douglass's influence encouraged men from Talbot County and beyond to enlist, seeing it as a path to freedom and citizenship. And 2 of Douglass's sons served in the United States colored troops, Lewis Henry and Charles Redmond, both of which survived the war. Next slide, please. Go back. There we go. Lewis served with the famous 54 Massachusetts and ultimately achieved the rank of Sergeant Major, which is the highest non-commissioned rank in the regiment. So any of us who served in the military, we know Sergeant Majors is a heck of a thing to achieve. Now, white officers initially led USCT regiments, but African American surgeons and chaplains were permitted, and they were officers. And white officers were specifically selected, and only the best were allowed to command a USCT regiment. It should not be considered discrimination that initially there were no black combat officers, because there literally was no black man that had any military experience, and almost all did not read or write, a requirement to become an officer. And the image here is of the term of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, the commander of the 54th Massachusetts, and he was also played by Matthew Broderick in the movie Glory. Most of us seen that. Wonderful movie. And Colonel Shaw died leading the 54th Massachusetts in an attack upon Fort Wagner in Charleston, South Carolina, and he was buried with his men. All right. During the U.S. Civil War, nearly 180,000 African Americans served, 80,000 from the Union states. Nearly 40,000 of these men died in service to the country. Of that 40,000, 30,000 died of disease. Maryland contributed 8,718 to the USCT, and Talbot County led our state in enlistments. More from this county enlisted in USCT than any state in Maryland. A recruitment station was set up in Oxford, where steamers transported recruits to Baltimore. Union soldiers also traveled throughout Talbot County and enlisted both enslaved and free blacks, often at night to avoid interference of overseers. Many enslaved persons left their farms to join the Union cause. Surprisingly, we find that many slave owners, such as Maryland Governor Thomas Holiday Hicks and Henry Holiday Goldsboro, Talbot County, were Unionists and supported enlistment efforts. And slave owners could receive $300 each enslaved person they offered for enlistment, but only if they were deemed loyal to the Union. And that was kind of a subjective term, loyalty. These claims were reviewed by a board, and the owners had to swear an oath of allegiance to the government of the United States and provide proof of title and deed of manumission to receive compensation. But upon acceptance, the enslaved person will be forever free. That was a Baltimore Sun newspaper article about, and here we have a blow up of, you go to the next slide. And it just shows, and this is like December 1863, and this is showing 401 in Talbot County. We're already leading the entire state by enlistments, and by the end, it's I think we have 607 names, but that was just December. We continue to lead. So well over 600 blacks in Talbot County fought in the USCT, and many in the U.S. Navy as well. That's the hard number to get. We were able to track down all these men by going through each of the regiments, So 1,000 names each regiment. We did all the Maryland regiments. When I say we, being the historical society and Virginia regiments. And so we had to go through about 10,000 list of cards because you couldn't sort them and see who said born in Talbot County or from Talbot County. The U.S. Navy is one big database of about 200,000 strong. We know a lot of our men went to the Navy. We don't have a number on that. We do know we have, at Talbot Historical Society now, we have 607 names. Of this number, 366 were enslaved men, 99 were freemen, and 145 had unknown status. Sometimes the records aren't. We have to do other sources. 451, which is 75%, listed their occupation as farmers. 88 men, which is 15%, listed their occupation as laborers. And 10% were comprised of various occupations, which included sailors, oystermen, teamsters, coachmen, waiters, draymen, whitewasher. I don't know what a whitewasher is, I don't know, but woodcutter, blacksmith, carpenter, and caulker. Caulkers in the ship industry, we got to caulk the seams of a vessel. This is just from Talbot County. Of our Talbot County men, 100 died from disease in field hospitals, included but limited to typhoid fever, cholera, pneumonia, diarrhea, dysentery, smallpox, etc. As I said earlier, out of the 40,000 blacks that fall for USCT, 30,000 died of disease, 10,000 common. Of our men, 54 were discharged for disability, generally from wounds they received in battle or from long-standing illnesses. 52 of our men were transferred to the U.S. Navy, and their fates are not really known, so we can't go to that. And that reflects our maritime heritage. Many blacks worked in the water, were oystermen. 48 men were killed directly or from wounds received in action. We know 180 men completed full term of their enlistment, typically was a 3-year term. And we still have 168 men whose fate are yet unknown, basically because incomplete documents and additional research has been done. But I think we got a pretty good start on this, and this is just an incredible history. Here's some enlistment cards, an example. And if you go to the Historical Society, we have actually a computer that you can bring up and see our exhibit. We also have it on the wall. And the first cards are a guy named David Brooks. Another one's William Brooks, I'm sure related. And then Harrison Brown. Family names you still see in Talbot County today. You open that board, you recognize. When I was starting this research a couple years ago, I was amazed because I was seeing finding records, breeds, and slaughters, kids that I grew up with, kids that I played ball with in Oxford, and I bet you they didn't know that or how their ancestors were heroes. Because if they did, they would have told me. No, some of this. So that's kind of cool. So it's just really, it really brings it home. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So this is an example of, I'm going to blow this up. This is an example of some of the documents we've covered. And it's kind of powerful. I think it's very powerful. Evidence of title. This is evidence of title to a human being. And this is because you have to have this in the records and you get $300 if you're an owner. So I married Ben in the city of Baltimore, County, Maryland. Do solemnly swear that John Green, who regimented, who served in the 7th Regiment, I believe it says, and then it says that she got title to him by the death of the will of her father, and she's full ownership. Let's do something here. Load this up so I can read this. There we go. So go to the next slide. That's actually just the title itself. So I can read. I try to read without it, but anyway. Next slide. There we go. And this is. We're trying to coordinate. She was pushing the slides, and I'm following right here. And if I mess up, bad shape. Okay. So.
This is what you wanted in large part of the name?
Yes, I think. I gotta get my view back. There we go. Okay, here's a deed of manumission and release of service. And again, it's for John Green. And Green is a Talbot County name that said that she's releasing from service. And I think the next slide blows up on that. That's in its title. Next slide blows up to that. There we go.
Well, the full one was there.
Yeah, and the next slide is below it. Whereas my slave, John Green, has enlisted in the service of the United States Color Troops in consideration thereof, I, Mary Bannon of Baltimore City, state of Maryland, do hereby in consideration of said enlistment, manumitted, set free, and release the above named John Green from all service due me. So that's in the records that we have.
Is that a document a person would need to keep on their person all the time?
I'm sorry, what?
Is that a document that a former slave would need to keep on their person all the time?
No, no. This would, they would have official stamps and filed probably at the courthouse or filed with the records of the individual. But I'm sure the individual did have certain records also. And the next slide is a certificate award of the Board of Claims, because it's package we sent in, and that they think that you were a loyal citizen, they could award you a $300 fee, and you had to take the oath of allegiance. I'm a loyal citizen, and that's a typical example for the Board of Claims. And again, this is for Mrs. Bannon and of Baltimore City, state of Maryland. And having proved under oath, it says his, but it's actually her, loyalty to the Constitution and government of the United States, and established his title of the ownership of John Green. And it's very powerful. A slave enlisted in Talbot County back in the day. And they awarded her $300. And there's a receipt on next for Mr. Green.
Signed by Colonel Green.
By term signed by Colonel Green. $300. Interestingly, before the Civil War, a slave person's value was about $1,000. And that was a huge sum. And I think in Maryland, it was mainly artificially high because the southern cotton states needed them so bad. But pretty perspective, you could buy a 3-acre farm or less than that. So it was an idea of that. But if you were, next slide, if you were a free man, you signed these volunteer enlistment paperwork. In the state of Maryland, this is the town of Easton. This was Joshua Johns, born in Dorchester, but he was living in Easton at the time, state of Maryland. And it talks about I'm signing up. They signed in Easton. And this is the kind of records we have. Messed up again. So next slide is African American recruitments. We'll talk about recruiting African Americans, and I'm going to use a lot of research I found in newspapers. And this is an article I found in the Daily Constitution that was actually published in Philadelphia and has a date, July 28, 1863. And this tells me a lot about what's going on in our county, in our area. And this is really interesting. Yesterday afternoon, Colonel Burney, in command of the Negro Regiment, now being recruited in Baltimore, marched at the head of a detachment of his troops to the Negro jail on Mr. Campbell on Pratt Street in Baltimore, and preemptively ordered the liberation of all the colored inmates. The order was immediately complied with, and 56 colored gentlemen and ladies, the two sexes about equal in numbers, marched out into the freedom of the streets. The men were asked to enlist, and they complied with no requisition. And the women were told to go where they please. And that kind of goes with Colonel Burney was doing what any good officer should do. You're going to get your enlistments whatever any way you can, and that was a good way. You notice what they were arrested for or in prison? Probably for trying to run away. I don't know.
Was that a black paper, a colored paper?
No, that was in a paper from Philadelphia, the Daily Constitution Union. It could be.
The reason
It
why
could be.
I asked is because
That's a
it's
great question.
colored gentlemen and ladies, and that's not
You're
normally
right.
the way.
And I see that in a lot of research. A lot of times they'll say blacks, sometimes they say Negroes. And excuse me if I'm using historical words. And sometimes they colored. But that's a very, very good point. And we can find that out. You can look up the Daily Constitution, on your phone nowadays and say the history of it. But that would be a wonderful point. And also we found in Maryland there were some slave owners that would say, hey, Colonel Murray's a little too aggressive. He's taking our enslaved person. So I think the legislature inquired about it and found an article here. And this actually is published in the Rutland Weekly in Vermont. Colonel Burney detail for recruiting Negroes in Maryland, has written a letter to the legislature of the state denying that colored men are forced into military service. On the contrary, he says he could not restrain them from rushing to his camp. And I think that's actually where it fell. I think there was very much enthusiasm about men to join. This is a little more closer to home. This is published in Baltimore Sun. It's about Easton. The steamer Sea, and this is interesting, Baltimore Sun, so it does use the term colored soldiers. The steamer Cecil arrived at the wharf at Easton Point on Thursday night last with a government officer on board for the purpose of recruiting persons of color. There were some 200 left yesterday morning in the steamer Champion, while the steamer Cecil remained and would take off a load in a short time. And you see the date, September 21st, and this is when our enlistments in Talbot County were ramping up. Okay, and this is an interesting article. This is from Buffalo, New York. And again, it pertains to Easton, and this tells me a lot. It tells me something. You got to be careful. You can't read one article and assume. You got to have other sources backing up. So this is kind of interesting. A gentleman just from Easton, Talbot County, Eastern Shore, Maryland, says that the enlistment of slaves and soldiers is going very rapid. This is done with the consent of their owners, who receives from the recruiting officers a certificate for every slave enlisted, which certificate will entitle the owner to $300 upon the passage of an act of emancipation by the state legislature, providing compensation to owners of such slaves upon furnishing proof the owner's loyalty. Such an act is expected to be passed at the next session of the legislature on the basis of the Missouri Emancipation Bill. The same course regarding enlisted slaves in Western Maryland is pursued by Colonel Burr in Baltimore. And so basically you're saying that, again, this reaffirms that there was very active enlistment and in Talbot County and a lot of units. It tells us a little bit. Next slide, please. Good. So going to the regiments themselves. Get my notes. So here's all the regiments listed for Maryland. Some of our men we found actually enlisted in Virginia regiments in a former region, Virginia. The regiments were formed in numerical order throughout the North. So the 4th mustered in first, followed by the 5th, 6th, 7th. These are the ones in Maryland. The 4th organized in Baltimore and saw action in Virginia and North Carolina. The 7th also organized in Baltimore, served in Virginia, Florida, and South Carolina. The 9th was organized in Benedict, Maryland, and saw action in South Carolina, Virginia, and some of the 9th were the first in Richmond. The 19th was also organized in Benedict, Maryland, just on the western shore in the south, and saw action in Virginia, and was with General Grant on his overland campaign from the Rapidan to the James River. And members of the 19th was present at Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And the 19th was heavily enlisted by men of Eastern Shore. There were a lot of Talbot Counties in the 19th, along with the 30th, a lot of Talbot Counties. Again, organized in Benedict, saw action in served Virginia, North Carolina. It was also General Grant's overland campaign. And many Talbot counties were in the 30th. The 39th also in Baltimore and served Virginia, North Carolina, part of Grant's overland. Our men in our Talbot counties, we found every one of those regiments. There's some more than others.
I think this class is winning for bone and friendship.
Yeah, I don't know. It's my fault. I swear I had it all. I know.
So then just give it to the secretary, your parent can call them. Not a citizen, but parent.
So now I'm going to talk about the draft. During the U.S. Civil War, the U.S. instituted its very first draft. And it's excluded free and enslaved blacks, only drafting white citizens. Wealthy men could avoid service by paying $300 for hiring substitutes. In the North, this led to a great resentment of working class white men and culminated in 1863 in the New York City draft riots. The working class whites were upset that they alone would be drafted and that the free black population would dominate all their jobs. And during these riots, which lasted for 4 days, free blacks were targeted by the rioters, and many were murdered. Military troops had to be sent in to restore order, and this was known as one of the bloodiest civil disturbances in our nation's history. Talbot County, however, did not experience such violence. Talbot County, however, was subject only to the first draft round, which was in October of 1862, and where 263 white men were drafted. And here's a newspaper article about it. However, for the next 3 draft rounds that the federal government had, Talbot County's significant black volunteers for the United States Scout Troops filled out county's quotas. So we had no draftees, which prevented hundreds of Talbot citizens from involuntarily being forced to serve. The volunteer enlistments of Talbot's black soldiers played a pivotal role in shaping our county's history and spared many white men the horrors of war. Next slide, please. Union commanders were initially skeptical of African American soldiers' abilities, given their lack of firearm experience and literacy. However, USCT soldiers repeatedly proved their valor. 16 total earned the Medal of Honor. In fact, the USCT regiments gained a reputation for attacking fearlessly and continuing to attack against overwhelming odds when most other units would have never been so bold. As I said, over 600 blacks from Talbot served, and many also joined the Navy. The image here is the Battle of the Siege of Petersburg, where many of our Talbot County men participated. Battle of the Crater. We'll talk about it. But they also had challenges. Black soldiers, along with their white officers, faced severe risks, as the Confederacy at first did not recognize them as legal combatants. On April 12, 1864, Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest attacked Fort Pillow, and he captured many prisoners. And then there were nearly 300 Union soldiers, including 200 African Americans, were massacred. This atrocity, known as the Fort Pillow Massacre, did not deter black troops. And remember, Fort Pillow became a rallying cry. Next slide, please. Many of our Talbot counties fought in General Grant's overland campaign, as I stated. They included many intense battles fought nearly consecutively during Grant's movements towards Richmond in 1864. And this was the deadliest campaign in the war, with a total combined casualties of over 80,000 over a period of 6 weeks. And just to quickly show you, the overland campaign began actually up here, the Rathman, the Battle of the Wilderness, with the 19th Regiment participating in. And Grant, General Lee was surprised. Normally, as he hit him hard at the Wilderness, and normally the Union generals went back off to Washington. Grant did not. Grant continued to move his army sideways, heading down to Richmond. General Lee would always have the shorter route, cut him off, and continuous battles all the way down till they finally crossed and Richmond down here. By that time, General Lee was down on men and supplies. He had to take defensive positions. General Lee didn't like that. He worked well in the open, maneuver warfare. And he knew once you got into a siege warfare, just a matter of time, because the North could overwhelm him with supplies and men. General Grant did a move that actually took General Lee by surprise. He went around Richmond and came down to Petersburg. It's not showed on the map below. Because General Grant realized that Petersburg was the key to Richmond, because it had all the rail lines going in. And so, luckily, not luckily, but the last minute, Lee shifted his men to Petersburg, and there was a big siege. And it lasted a month or 2 months for the siege. And our men participated in that. Next slide, we're going to talk about each unit a little bit. The battles and skirmishes of 4th Infantry. And we see it. Most of this is the Battle of Overland Campaign, different battles. Bermuda 100, Chaffin's Farm, Dutchess Gap, Fort Fisher, Sugarloaf. Then they were actually moved, I think, by ship and went on to the banks of North Carolina, attacked Fort Fisher, Sugarloaf Hill, And then they came back for the siege of Petersburg, which is the state of that. The 7th Infantry, almost the same, but they also went aboard ship for a while and went to South Carolina. Then they went to Jackson, Florida, and then they came back up to Virginia and joined General Grant on his overland campaign. And he also were some of the troops that entered Richmond on its fall. Next slide, please. 9th Infantry, first were deployed down to Port Royal, South Carolina. That's where I was based as a Marine Corps officers flying, Buford. And they were down there for a couple of months. Then they came back up to Virginia and at the siege of Petersburg, Fort Gilmore, Chaffin's Farm, all these different things at Richmond. But you can see these units are almost in constant conflict. The 19th, they did a lot. They were with General Grant from almost the beginning. They went all the way through. And at the very bottom here, you'll see that they were at General Lee's surrender, or the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia. Next slide, please. We should have a good representation here. And I believe our Talbot County USC troops will probably stay in formation as the Army of Northern Virginia came in and turned in their arms after the battle. Next slide, please. Okay, the 30th also, many Talbot counties. You see the siege of Petersburg there formed a little later. The Battle of the Crater, the 19th is also that. The Battle of the Crater, I'll talk about that a little bit. I think I have a slide down here. I did do some research to see if there was a difference for blacks versus white. There's no statistical differences. They talked about they did have the best weapons and best gear. A lot of that because they weren't established in 1863, so they were getting the newest stuff. And by that part of the war, the contractors who provided shoddy stuff were sorted out. They got the good stuff. Yes,
Okay, so we've got everyone back. Can you go ahead now and
Sorry.
start the taking Q&A and we'll look at everything.
Okay, are we back up for you?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody online. We went down a little bit,
Whoa.
back online, so I'll continue. We stopped, so they didn't miss anything. And what we did is just it took some questions in-house. So we're talking about the death rate. I think let's correct. Tina, is that correct?
Yeah, Petersburg, like,
Yeah, and I went back to talk about the death rate, and it's pretty much the same for each of the units. The 19th Regiment had death was 293. That's about 30%. We know 50 died in battle, and 243 died of disease. And okay, so we were at Petersburg. Good. Okay, that's good. So go down to the cannons with a USCT. And there we go, Petersburg, part of the siege of Petersburg. We don't know who this gentleman is. He could be one of our Talbot counties. He's standing guard, standing proud. African-American units also became very well known for having their uniforms. Perfect. They looked good in uniform. And they took pride in their appearance. It's another trait we saw. Here's the next slide. Here's just, so I'm going to look at some pictures now. I love it. This is Petersburg for the siege of Petersburg. And when we blow up this, we can see some USCT and amongst them during the siege. Next slide. We have, and this is that came from the newspaper Harper's Weekly. They did a print of the Battle of the Crater. And during the siege of Petersburg, General Lee was entrenched in. It was kind of stalemated. So you got an idea, let's dig a tunnel. There's a Pennsylvania miners and dig a tunnel right underneath the Confederate lines, and we loaded up with all these explosives. And I think it was a 19th USCT regiment that had been trained. They'd been trained for this mission. Okay, we're gonna blow this up, and they trained trench warfare and how to do it. They just took it very, very seriously. At the last minute, one of the Union generals go, we send a USCT in first. It looked like we're using them as cannon fodder. He was worried about the political ramifications. So the last second, he switched it to a white who weren't trained. They blew this big thing up. The Confederate line was a big hole in it. The Confederates absolutely stunned. And that the white unit went in, did the exact wrong thing they're not supposed to do. Instead of going up and around the crater, they went into it and they were trapped. And then the Confederates reorganized. And they had about 5 or 10 minute window there, and they were got their fences in. It was a turkey shoot. So guess what they did? They sent the USCT in to save them, and actually saved the day. So a lot of the records show Talbot County wounded the Battle of the Crater, killed the Battle of the Crater. They were the men that went in to the Battle of the Crater. This is interesting. I can tell you know about this story a little bit. Next slide. Bermuda 100 outside of Richmond. It's a great image. Very, you don't have a whole lot of pictures from the era. It's photography starting, but I just love to show it. Next slide. This is USCT, the Battle of New Market Heights, and we know where Talbot County is right now. And next slide is the Battle of Dutchess Gap, Virginia. And that probably was posed by them. One, to get a good image on it, you got to hold still, it takes some minutes. And you can blow it up, and there's their hammers on top. So they were doing a good job there. Next slide, please. Battle of Chafing's Farm. This is a fort near Chase's Farm that USCT participated in. And the next slide down is the fall of Richmond. And some of our men were the very first of the Union troops enter Richmond. And interestingly, all those fires, that was probably Confederates set those fires as they evacuated Richmond. Our men were there. Next slide. The Library of Congress says this is an image of the 7th USCT, although I've seen it referred to other regiments. That image is actually taken in Washington. Well, that's not a whole regiment, that would be like one company of regiment. But that is a famous slide, and it could very well be some of our men right in there. Next slide, but I will show you some of our Talbot counties. Jacob Johns. He was a free man at the time of his enlistment, and he enrolled at age 21. And he put his occupation as a farmer. And he served in the 19th Regiment. Next slide. This is a very interesting slide. It's actually from a hospital, I think it was up by DC, of persons that are covered. And we finally researched of who these men were. We found it. And next slide, this person right there, Talbot County, Samuel Bond, 19th USCT. How cool is that? We'll follow Samuel Bond a little bit, so you can see his image. And there's his evidence of title. He was enslaved. That's how we know he was in Talbot County. Next slide. There's his deed and manumission. It was actually handwritten. And the next slide is his enlistment card, not part of his enlistment records. The bottom. Died in post hospital, Brownsville, Texas, August 8, 1865. He died of dysentery. But the 19th, and like I said earlier, had moved down as part of the occupation. He served his nation well. Next slide. Now look at this good-looking man. James Brooks. That's a family name, saved in Talbot County to this day. He was an enslaved person and joined at age 20. He listed his occupation as farmer. Next slide. This is his casualty report. He was wounded at the Battle of Petersburg on June 27, 1864, with a gunshot wound to his right arm. Next slide. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about emancipation in America. The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, only applied to the Confederate states, not the Union slave states like Maryland. And there were 5 slave states that fought for the Union at this time. I earlier said 4. The 5th one was West Virginia, that broke off Virginia and joined the Union as a slave state. However, the Civil War prompted many Marylanders to reconsider slavery. In 1862, Maryland newspapers, including the Eastern Star and the Cambridge Democrat, pushed for a discussion of emancipation. Then the volunteerism, valor, and sacrifice of so many of Maryland's black populations towards a war effort strongly influenced Marylanders and contributed greatly to pushing Maryland towards abolition. And this coincides with the term I use, the awakening. The push for emancipation of black population originated as a grassroots movement of the people of Maryland. And if you read this newspaper article, and this is actually from California, so this is kind of interesting. Emancipation in Maryland. The Baltimore American says evidence accumulated that the heart of Maryland is deeply stirred. That however efforts may be made to postpone or avoid discussion on the current topic of emancipation, it will make itself apparent. It is no more possible, it says, to ignore this matter than it is to ignore the present war. And then the Eastern Star, published on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, says that the time has come when the question must be met, discussed, and decided by the people. And in the bottom, it talks about the Cambridge Democrat that says the same thing. So this is in midsummer 1862. Next slide. Another article from a newspaper in Bangor, Maine. The prospect is now that the emancipation cause will sweep the state of Maryland. The planters and farmers are urging Governor Bradford, I am told, to call the legislature together to pass the convention bill as amended by Reverend Johnson, who succeeded in the House, and striking out the section forbidding discussion of the slave question. And it was thought that the governor will yield to the public demand. And again, that's June 1862. Another newspaper article in Maryland, in California, August 1862. This is very telling. The cause of emancipation is already making decided progress in Maryland. The city of Baltimore readers will remember the City Union Convention declared some months ago its sympathy with the emancipation scheme of the president. And since the two leading city papers, the American and the Clipper, have likewise, though less openly, come out in favor of it. The country journals are divided, as is natural. Some, as the Kent News and the Worcester Shield, violently oppose emancipation and protest against what they call alkalizing the Union Party. But on the other hand, as we learned from the Maryland correspondence of the Methodists of the city, the emancipation policy is boldly, fearlessly, and warmly advocated by the Cambridge Intelligencer, the Cecil Whig, the Frederick Examiner, the Annapolis Gazette, the Cumberland Civilian, the Hagerstown Herald, the Westminster Sentinel, and the Denton Union. The correspondent adds that the people are responding to the appeals of these papers, and that before the year is out, emancipationists will hold a convention, and that they are confident.
It's embarrassing for you.
It's one of my damn.
There you go.
Okay, so this tells us a lot, and you know, we think that, you know, it was forced upon us. What was the uprising? And a lot has come from the valor of our USCT. They realized that these men are servicemen, and they didn't have to go, and they realized what they were doing for the country, and that makes very interesting. So we'll continue on. So in Maryland's emancipation, November 1st, 1864, with Reverend Bell, and these are going to celebrate here this November. And we'll talk about this image in a little bit. And that's the only image I really got of after emancipation. It's the Willis family. Shouldn't talk about right now. This is the Willis family that's outside of Oxford, small farm, very small farm. And before the war, he had two or three enslaved persons. He hired 2 or 3 people to help him. And this is one lady having enslaved, and that's Mr. Willis, that's his wife, and her helpers, and post-war. And I think she stayed with the family for a very long time until Mr. Willis's death. So, Maryland Governor August W. Bradford called for a constitutional convention. And by the way, this is the Willis family diaries. It's they kept a farm journal over a 100-year period, so you get a lot of good information from this in their research. So Governor Bradford called for a constitutional convention in April 1864. The Maryland voters elected delegates. A new state constitution abolishing slavery was proposed and adopted by the convention. And it was adopted by a popular vote of the people, because it had voted out to the vote to people on October 12, 1864. They voted in the new Constitution, and part of that abolished slavery, and it took effect on November 1st. Maryland became the first Union slave state to abolish slavery, and we did so a full year before the 13th Amendment. On November 1st, Easton held a large celebration where free and newly freed blacks, along with white citizens, gathered. Some former enslaved persons continued working for their owners, while others pursued new opportunities. And we also, from that Willis family diary, we know about that celebration because he talks about it. Big celebration, Easton on that day. The town of Trapp, Talbot County, mainly town of Trapp, still celebrates Emancipation Day on November 1st, even now. It's been continuous, and that's what Reverend Bell does. Talbot Dale does that also. Next slide, please. After war, some of our men returned to Talbot County. Unionville, founded in 1867 by 18 United States colored troops, veterans, stands as a powerful testament to the courage and resilience of black soldiers who fought for their own freedom. These men, some formerly enslaved on the very land where they later built their homes, returned from war not just as survivors, but as visionaries determined to create a future free of oppression. Example of James Calgill, Quaker abolitionists, leased land to these veterans and required them to establish both a church and a school, institutions that would anchor the community for generations. By 1871, a church was formed, and St. Stephen's AME Church, completed in 1892, remains a cornerstone of Unionville today. Next slide, please. The graves of those 18 USCT soldiers, marked by Union Army headstones, honor their service and sacrifice. Unionville is not just a settlement, it is a monument to freedom, perseverance, and the enduring impact of the United States Colored Troops. In 1998, the state of Maryland Department of Highways designated the village in the cemetery a historic site. The cemetery has been designated by the state of Maryland's Office of Tourism as part of the Civil War Trails through Maryland. Next slide, please. Here's a grave of Mr. Copper. And next slide. Here's his family descendants. And we do have that on this, but I can't remember the signatures to you. But these are some descendants of our Unionville.
Do you know when that was?
What's that?
When was that photo taken?
You know what? I have that data and I meant to put it down, but I don't. Can't tell you. Can't tell you. Next slide. Now we get into a gentleman I like. Many of us love to hear about. Though Frederick Douglass is by far Talbot County's most famous native, there's another Talbot native who survived slavery and went on to make significant and lasting contributions to the citizens of Talbot, which still reverberates throughout our community to this day. Nathaniel Nays Hawkins, a Talbot County legend, was born a slave and enlisted in USCT in 1863, but was discharged due to varicose veins. But after the war, Nace became a respected community leader, helping both black and white citizens. He helped establish Ashbury Methodist Episcopal Church in 1869, now Scott's United Methodist Church. Reverend Bell is a Reverend Bell, sitting right here. Nathaniel Hawkins founded the Eastfield community near Trapp and established Talbot County's first free black school in 1878.
Trapp?
First free black school in 1878. There was actually schools for blacks by Reverend Bacon in the 1700s, but the masters had to pay for that, so it was their post-war. In 1888, he was appointed as a road supervisor for Trapp by the Talbot County Commissioners. He was very well respected by all. But Nace's most celebrated accomplishment was organizing the first Emancipation Day celebration in Maryland, and we believe the nation, on November 1st, 1867, just 3 years after it actually happened. Nace went to the county commissioners and asked them permission for the use of the Main Street through Trapp for a parade specifically for the celebration. And by this time, Nace had become well known for his integrity and willingness to assist his community. And permission was granted. Many white citizens in Trapp and throughout the county donated money and musical instruments. and his parade preparations. As I said, it goes on to today. Next slide. And here's I'm one ahead of you, Brian. Okay. Nace led. Okay, I think.
But you read that.
Oh yeah, I think we're next one. Okay.
Yes.
So Nace led this parade dressed in his uniform with a sash and sword, and with his Aunt Aldy by his side carrying her Bible. The event was so successful it became an annual tradition, known as the Nace's Day Parade, with bands and parade attendees coming from across the Marble, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. Nace continued to organize the event until his death, nearly 33 years later, and it remains a lasting celebration nearly 160 years later to this day. This is the very first Emancipation Day celebration in Maryland, and if not the first in the nation, it is indisputable that it is the first continuously celebrated celebration in the nation. And again, Nace's Day will again be celebrated November 1st in Trapp. And the Talbot Historical Society will assist by having a professional actor, and he was on Zoom in the earlier session, a guy named Darius Wallace.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, thank you. Trey Nathaniel Hopkins with an event at the Scots Church in Trapp, and during a celebration later, either here in Eastern Oxford. I think the Oxford Community Center is going to host this for the second one. And the Historical Society hopes to take this to at least one of our schools so they can learn this incredible history. Okay, my mission, I'm going to want this earth. I want to make Nathaniel Hopkins and our celebration here recognize by those folks across the bay. I want it to become a statewide event, and we should have Nation's Day November 1st and recognize it. And these people, some in this room, kept this alive. Their descendants kept this history alive. And it's just an incredible history. It's veterans history. It's all our history. It's not just Black history. It's all of our history. So talk about a Historical Society exhibit. It's one going right now, 25 South Washington Street. This is a little bit south of the courthouse. At Valor and Honor, Talbot County, so it's his culture during the Civil War. Wednesday to Saturdays, 10 for 3, and it's free. Show you a little bit of slides here. Next slide, please. During open ceremonies, we brought a lot of the big wigs throughout the state. That's the, I can't remember his name now, commander of the Maryland State Police. We brought in a USCT, some reenactors from Philadelphia, and that's William Griffith, commander of Post 77 here in Easton. And this is his adjutant Noreen Wilson, doing her exhibit. We had a kind of a party and got to show her an exhibit. Next slide. Here's some great images within our exhibit. And again, I love that image of the 7th USCT. Just look at her face, the pride, military pride that is shown. Of course, we're always going to talk about Douglas because he's another son of Talbot County. We got, next slide, please. Some great big posters. And next slide, just to show you. Wonderful exhibit. We busted a budget. And let you know, the exhibit was a combination of the effort. We don't, the Society didn't do this alone. We reached out to our veterans organizations, to Commander Griffith, Post 7th. We brought them in. Here's what we're going to do. Bring in your people. We don't know it all. Let's do this together. They contributed financially. I went to the VFW. This is wonderful. VFW granted us $5,000 for exhibit. So it was a coordinated effort. Historical Society and the Veterans Organization and other African American leaders. You know, Mr. Walter Black. We all know him. He's so well respected. Came to it. We got the Dr. Clara Small, and she came to it. We know she knows more about this stuff than anyone. So it was a coordinated effort. It's just not the Historical Society. So here's some of the last slides. But just go back one to the artifacts. Yeah, so that's the Dutchess Gap. I'm going to go back one more. There's a lot of artifacts to look at and the history. We also, in this, what we told you today about the history of Italy, history of Ashbury Church. Nathaniel Hopkins, we included it because we wanted to tell the history leading up, and then the war, the battles, and then Nathaniel Hopkins at the end. And we can go to the last slide, please. And on the wall, I call it the wall of names. We have all 607 names of our many who all that we found. And that's incredible. The site, people go, that's my ancestor. that or this. It's amazing. And they go, we have a computer screen with a database. Go and look up their name, look at all those records. And then we have these other things right here just as examples of list of records. Killed at the Battle of Petersburg, wounded hero, or whatever else. Very, very powerful. You really get the magnitude of it when you see all those names on the wall. Your team. So I encourage you to come out to the exhibit, and I also encourage you to all come to the Nation Day Parade that these gentlemen right here put it on in the celebration on November 1st. I think you got some pretty good food and other stuff, events, and all. And I'm going to eat my guest.
It's good food.
You know, it's got good stuff. Good food. That's my presentation. So if you got any questions? Yes, sir.
Just how history gets ignored. I mean, you presented a lot of history, but it seemed like the military forgot that history and the testimony about that was given when they were considering integrating the armed forces under Truman's administration. The Army was arguing, stating that blacks lacked the will to fight. I mean, I just mentioned that because it seems like we'd like to go. There's an effort to go back to that state of ignorance going on right now.
In history, I was a Marine Corps officer. Okay, so my Marines, we all led Marine Corps Green. And so I led Marines of all races and even women and men, and you realize that. History is our greatest teacher. Okay, they should have known. And we forget. But I can tell you, our people in this nation from the Revolutionary War, African Americans fought with us. In every wars we have ever been in, they have fought.
In every single conflict.
In every single conflict. And they've always done so valiantly. Some of my greatest heroes, I was a Marine Corps fighter pilot. Okay, so I flew, as a picture of me. And Tuskegee Airmen, it's amazing things. They got into the most complex fighter of the day, the P-51. That was the most elite. And they did it better than anyone else. And again, they showed that tenacity. Sometimes in combat, it's the one who has the most courage or tenacity that wins. And I know the bomber groups were relieved when they saw those red tails. And they, I think, were some of my greatest heroes because they also had to face not only the Germans, but also discrimination. I think in the military, when you're at, and I never was in actual combat, I don't know if you were, but when bullets are flying, that person next to you, like I do in the Marine Corps, there is no race. There is no this. You are brothers, and you get bound. You learn, the humanity. So, but you're exactly right, and that's that.
And in fighting in every conflict, some of the worst battles they had to fight is coming back to the United States.
Oh yes. Well, yeah, I think all our Vietnam veterans. That were revenue man. You're good.
And that's one of the saddest things that of my experience is to get back to California and they tell you take the uniform off, but not say to go home.
Yeah, I can't
And
imagine.
after fighting in the country for a year, right? Or someone you don't know.
And losing your friends and doing your duty.
And you get to California, you see us all of a Southern California, take off the uniforms for not saying where.
I just can't imagine. I never got the experience. Luckily, I got in during the Reagan years, was building up the military. Do we have any questions from our online participants?
Yeah, I have got a question. It seems like somewhere, because I've been to see the display about 3 times, but somebody I think said at Appomattox at the surrender we had, was it 8 or 16? Do you happen to know the number of Talbot County soldiers that were there, colored troops?
I don't have that number. I do know our regiment was there, so but I don't have that data exactly how many number. We know the 19th USCT regiment were there, and we have the database now, and we can go through it and say, well, out of the 19th USCT, we had X number were from Talbot County. 900 might be maybe 200, 250. And we also researched how many got killed or left before the surrender, and by process of elimination, you could probably get it down to a number that's fairly accurate. If they joined and they were still there and looked at their muster rolls, because this requires someone say it generally surrendered. You got to see if they're still there during that time. But no, I don't have that exact number.
Well, whoever I heard it from, it sounded like at the time that they were an expert on that they had done what you're just referring to. And hopefully I wrote that down somewhere.
There was one gentleman we started to consult with, he had been a board member of the Historical Society some years ago, and he did some research, particularly on the 19th, not as broad as we did, but I know he did very detailed, but he did give us the records that he had, and our staff reviewed them so that we might have that number. I can't tell you offhand.
Okay, and by the way, real quick, it's not a major thing, but the name of the people who owned the farm outside of Oxford was Willis.
Yes,
Willis. Not Will.
That's the information short. What they did is they had farm journals and they recorded. And Jim Dawson, the gentleman who owns a unicorn bookstore, Jim Dawson's known as the unofficial official historian of Talbot County. He the journals were actually volumes, and he condensed it down because you don't need to hear about I slaughtered a pig every single day, but and it's incredible. And of course, only one little section is about the Civil War period, but you get a lot of information about leading up, a lot of stuff on Nathaniel Hopkins. And it was interesting on Emancipation Day, Mr. Willis went to his two enslaved persons and guys, you're now free today. And I would like you to stay on. We'll pay you the same wages we pay the free hands. And by the way, there's a big celebration in Easton tonight, and you're welcome to have off and go celebrate. And the two hands are, well, boss, we got corn to shut. We're too busy. So it was interesting. They're dedicated. So I like that story. I mean, but Talbot County experienced everything extreme. You got the small farms, but then again, you had wide plantation. That was still the industrialization. But then again, we saw where Edward Lloyd, about 84 of his enslaved persons, fought for the Union. And I found a newspaper article that said that he voluntarily did. And he said that's odd because he always criticized the Northern policies. And that's one source of information. You can't say it's valid. It's a lead. I did go into our database and see if any of these, and he got compensated for any of the enslaved persons. And he did not. I could not find any enslaved person. It says Honor's Lloyd where it came from, but no evidence they got compensated. The government considered him disloyal. So I don't know whether he voluntarily did or not.
Did I hear correctly, Mark, that the owner of the land, slave, I guess he was slave owner at the time, in Unionville gave the troops their land?
Correct. The Cowgirls. The Cowgirls did, and they were, I think they made them Quakers. They had already abolished enslaved persons also. But they gave them, at least we have a copy of the historical society, the copy of these leases. It's like $1 a year. But it had terms. You got to establish a church. You got to chat a school, and actually gave them the land to help them establish the community. So we had during this time period, and Jim Dawson and I talked about it. There was it's all what was in your heart. There's people that are in this world that are evil, and you can look at there's people that are good, and there's both sides of it. And sometimes the worst stories always come out because that's how it news. But you also got to talk about. I like talking about the grassroots for emancipation. You don't hear about that. It actually came up from the grass up, and Talbot County is right in the middle of it. You saw the awakening. But yes, the Cowgirls helped immensely. So many other people helped also. Other questions?
Yes. On the public school, was the first black school in Maryland public, but that was a public school, right?
Well, we all about that. Go to the Senate.
I'm half of my representative, that's for sure, man. I'm a believer, that's where.
Basic establishment of first free black school?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. That was in Talbot
Talk
County.
a little bit about Nation Day, I can share some other.
Oh,
information.
We'll speak about Mason Day.
Is it the time now, or?
If you want to have time for,
There is one question.
okay, let's ask some questions. We'll go on.
I had one question.
Yes, ma'am.
And you might have already told us, but were a lot of these records, like the manumission records and stuff, were they here in the local courthouse, or where'd you go to get those?
No, so technology is the key to that. That's how, by the way, that's how I did my book. Technology. Today's, like, for example, the National Archives, you're going online. You can keyword search. Not long ago, you had to go in physically, go in and look up documents, so hard catalog. When I did my book, there's this record called the War Rebellion. It's 135 set. I found a digitized keyword search. We found all these records. It's part of the National Archives, and it's through an application called fold3.com. And that's all our military history, military records. And so our staff in the Historical Society, and I'm going to do this on our computers, we have an account. If you want to go in, we'll let you use our account. And you can look up. You can look up the databases for the regiments, you know, the rosters, and you can select each individual names. And then when the names come up, we have all the records. So it's really because of technology that the records are kept in the National Archives. And some years ago, there was a fire, so some records are lost. But we have a pretty good collection of them for our USCT soldiers. Did I answer your question?
Do you?
Hey,
Yes, there is.
hey, Paul.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. I'm going to actually have to get off in a second here, but I was curious if the 19th had any kind of correspondence with the 54th Regiment.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Probably not. Because again, and the reason I say that is that many of them were literate, couldn't read and write.
Right.
So, and I don't think their military paths crossed. We did have some units that were in Fort Worth, South Carolina later, after a couple of years later. So, but that would be something to research. If the unit that was in Fort Worth, South Carolina, and later went to Hilton Head, and look at where the 54th were if they did cross paths. But they correspondence at all.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It's a great presentation, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you.
good.
Any other questions for anybody?
I have a question. I know that the Historical Society does really great tours of downtown Easton.
Uh-huh.
Is it the Historical Society that does hill tours too, or is that something?
I don't think so. I don't know. I think we have done hill tours. And really would ask, but I don't, we don't do them regularly. And I don't been on the tour, walking tour downtown. So I don't know where those take. They should take them.
They mainly go in a circle, and it's fascinating.
I can ask. I know they gave me some question where that tour goes.
Yeah, I spoke to Peggy Moran or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't do them.
Well, they should. Yeah. We have one heck of a history here in Pollock County. I mean, with what we just with Frederick Douglass, Nathaniel Hopkins, one of the first African American communities, plus having more USCT than any county and state. And we should be proud of that. And long of our state shedding off the barbaric practice of slavery before we were made to by the 13th Amendment. And we did it and it was the people. It wasn't the government coming down, it was the grassroots of people. And interestingly enough, I heard even at the 13th Amendment, many states never did abolish their own, it was still in their books. So that's something to be proud of, I think, as Marylanders.